Collection, corralling your stuff. In the previous section, I described the basic procedures for collecting your work. This section will lead you in more detail through the process of getting all your incompletes, all your stuff, into one place, into what I call in. Just gathering a few more things than you currently have will probably create a positive feeling for you, but if you can hang in there and really do the whole collection process 100%, it will change your experience dramatically and give you an important new reference point for being on top of your work. When I coach a client through this process, the collection phase usually takes between 1 and 6 hours. It can take longer than you think if you're committed to a full-blown capture that will include everything at work and everywhere else. That means going through every storage area and every nook and cranny in every location, including cars, boats, and other homes if you have them. Be assured that if you give yourself at least a couple of hours to tackle this part, you can grab the major portion of things outstanding. And you can even capture the rest by creating relevant placeholding notes. For example, purge and process boat storage shed, and deal with hall closet. In the real world, you probably won't be able to keep your stuff 100% collected all the time, but it should become an ideal standard that keeps you motivated to consistently clean house of all the things about your work and life that have your attention. There are very practical reasons to gather everything before you start processing it. It's helpful, first of all, to have a sense of the volume of stuff you have to deal with. Secondly, it lets you know where the end of the tunnel is. And lastly, when you're processing and organizing, you don't want to be distracted psychologically by an amorphous mass of stuff that might still be somewhere. Once you have all the things that require your attention gathered in one place, you'll automatically be operating from a state of enhanced focus and control. It can be daunting to capture into one location at one time all the things that don't belong where they are. It may even seem a little counterintuitive because most of that stuff is not that important. That's why it's still lying around. It wasn't an urgent thing when it first showed up, and probably nothing's blown up yet because it hasn't been dealt with. It's the business card you put in your wallet of somebody you thought you might want to contact sometime. It's the printer that you keep telling yourself you're going to move to a better location in your office. These are the kinds of things that nag at you, but that you haven't decided either to deal with or to drop entirely from your list of open loops. But because you think there still could be something important in there, that stuff is controlling you and taking up more psychic energy than it deserves. Keep in mind, you can feel good about what you're not doing only when you know what you're not doing. So, it's time to begin. Grab your in basket and a half-inch stack of plain paper for your notes, and let's go. Physical gathering. The first activity is to search your physical environment for anything that doesn't belong where it is, the way it is, permanently, and put it into your in basket. As you engage in the collecting phase, you may run into one or more of the following problems. What if an item is too big to go in the in basket? If you can't physically put something in the in basket, then write a note on a piece of letter-size plain paper to represent it. For instance, if you have a poster or some other piece of artwork behind the door to your office, just write "Artwork Behind Door" on a letter-size piece of paper and put the paper in the in basket. Be sure to date it, too. It's also just a great habit to date everything you handwrite. What if the pile is too big to fit in the in basket? If you're like 98% of my clients, your initial gathering activity will collect much more than can be comfortably stacked in an in basket. If that's the case, just create stacks around the in basket and maybe even on the floor underneath it. Ultimately, you'll be emptying the in stacks as you process and organize everything. Instant dumping. If it's immediately evident that something is trash, go ahead and toss it when you see it. If you're not sure what something is or whether it's worth keeping, go ahead and put it into in. You'll be able to decide about it later when you process the in basket. What about things that are already on lists and in organizers? You may already have some lists and some sort of organization system in place. But unless you're thoroughly familiar with this workflow processing model and have implemented it previously, I recommend that you treat those lists as items still to be processed, like everything else in. but I can't lose that thing. Often in the collection process, someone will run across a piece of paper or a document that causes her to say, "Oh my God, I forgot about that. I've got to deal with that." If that happens to you, first ask yourself if it's something that really has to be handled before you get through this initial implementation time. If so, best deal with it immediately so you get it off your mind. If not, go ahead and put it into N. You're going to get all that processed and emptied soon anyway, so it won't be lost. Ready now? Okay. Start piling those things on your desk into N. Often there'll be numerous things right at hand that need to go in there. Many people use their whole desktop as N. If you're one of them, you'll have several stacks around you to begin your N collection with. Start at one end of your workspace and move around, dealing with everything on every cubic inch. Typical items will be stacks of mail and memos, phone slips, collected business cards, notes from meetings. Resist the urge to say, as almost everyone does initially, "Well, I know what's in that stack, and that's where I want to leave it." That's exactly what hasn't worked before, and it all needs to go into the N basket. As you go around your desktop, ask yourself if you have any intention of changing any of the tools or equipment there. Is your phone okay? Your computer? The desk itself? If anything needs changing, write a note about it and toss it into N. Continue working your way around your office, collecting everything sitting on the tops of credenzas or counters or cabinets that doesn't belong there permanently. Often there will be stacks of reading material, mail, and miscellaneous folders and support material for actions and projects. Collect it all. Maybe there is reference material that you've already used and just left out. If that's so, and if you can return it to the file cabinet or the bookshelf in just a second, go ahead and do that. Be careful to check with yourself, though, about whether there is some potential action tied to the material before you put it away. If there is, put it into N so you can deal with it later in the process. Now look inside the cabinets. What's in there? Any broken or out-of-date things in there? Often I'll find collectibles and nostalgia that aren't meaningful to my clients any longer. One general manager of an insurance office, for instance, wound up tossing out at least a small dumpster's worth of recognition awards he had accumulated over the years. If some of these areas are out of control and need purging and organizing, write that on a note and toss it into N. Next, anything on bulletin boards that needs action? Anything tacked onto the walls that doesn't belong there? Any attention on your pictures, artwork, plaques, or decorations? How about the open shelves? Any books that need to be read or donated? Any catalogs, manuals, or 3-ring binders that are out of date or have some potential action associated with them? Any piles or stacks of things on the floor? Just scoot them over next to your N basket to add to the inventory. Next, is there anything you want to do or change about any of your office equipment or furniture or the physical space itself? Does everything work? Do you have all the lighting you need? If there are actionable items, you know what to do. Make a note and put it in N. Depending on the scope of what you're addressing in this process, you may want to do some version of the same kind of gathering anywhere else you keep stuff. Mental gathering, the mind sweep. Once you feel you've collected all the physical things in your environment that need processing, you'll want to collect anything else that may be residing in your psychic RAM. What has your attention that isn't represented by something already in your N basket? This is where the stack of plain paper really comes into play. I recommend that you write out each thought, each idea, each project, or thing that has your attention on a separate sheet of paper. You could make one long list on a pad, but given how you will later be processing each item individually, it's actually more effective to put everything on separate sheets. You'll find that things will tend to occur to you in somewhat random fashion. Little things, big things, personal things, professional things, in no particular order. In this instance, go for quantity. It's much better to overdo this process than to risk missing something. You can always toss the junk later. Your first idea may be save the ozone layer, and then you'll think, I need cat food. Grab them all. If your head is empty of everything, personally and professionally, then your in-basket is probably quite full. In addition to the paper-based and physical items in your in-basket, your inventory of in should include any resident voicemails and all the emails that are currently staged in the in area of your communication software. It should also include any items on your organizer lists for which you have not yet determined next actions. I usually recommend that clients download their voicemails onto paper notes and put those into their in-baskets, along with their whole organizer notebooks, which usually need some significant reassessment. If you've been using something like a Palm for anything other than calendar and telephone address lists, I suggest you print out any task and to-do lists and put them, too, into your in-basket. Emails are best left where they are. When you've done all that, you're ready to take the next step. That brings us to the next section, getting in to empty, which means getting your in-basket to empty. Getting in to empty doesn't mean actually doing all the actions and projects that you've collected. It just means identifying each item and deciding what it is, what it means, and what you're going to do with it. The best way to learn this is by doing, but there are a few basic rules to follow. First, process the top item first. Second, process one item at a time. And third, never put anything back into in. Let me elaborate. Top item first. Even if the second item down is a personal note to you from the president, and the top item is a piece of junk mail, you've got to process the junk mail first. The verb process does not mean spend time on. It just means decide what the thing is and what action is required and then dispatch it accordingly. Most people get to their in-basket or their email and look for the most urgent, most fun, or most interesting stuff to deal with first. But that's not processing your in-basket. When you're in processing mode, you must get into the habit of starting at one end and just cranking through items one at a time in order. As soon as you break that rule and process only what you feel like processing, you'll invariably begin to leave things unprocessed. Then it will back up all over your desk and office. One item at a time. You may find you have a tendency, while processing your in-basket, to pick something up, not know exactly what you want to do about it, and then let your eyes wander onto another item farther down the stack and get engaged with it. That item may be more attractive to your psyche because you know right away what to do with it. This is dangerous territory. What's in your hand is likely to land on an amorphous stack on the side of your desk because you become distracted by something easier, more important, or more interesting below it. Don't do this. Most people also want to take a whole stack of things out of the in-basket at once, put it right in front of them, and try to crank through it. Although I empathize with the desire to deal with a big chunk, I constantly remind clients to put back everything but the one item on top. The focus on just one thing forces the requisite attention and decision-making to get through all your stuff. Nothing goes back into in. There's a one-way path out of in. Eliminate the bad habit of continually picking things up out of in, not deciding what they mean or what you're going to do about them, and then just leaving them there. The key processing question: what's the next action? You've got the message. You're going to deal with one item at a time, and you're going to make a firm next action decision about each one. This may sound easy, but it requires you to do some fast, hard thinking. Much of the time, the action will not be self-evident. It will need to be determined. On that first item, for example, do you need to call someone, fill something out, get information from the web, email your boss? What? If there's an action, its specific nature will determine the next set of options. But what if you say, there's really nothing to do with this? It's likely that a portion of your in-basket will require no action. There will be three types of things in this category. First, there's trash. If you've been following my suggestions, you'll no doubt already have tossed out a big pile of stuff. It's also likely that you will have put stacks of material into in that include things you don't need anymore. So don't be surprised if there's still a lot more to throw away as you process your stuff. It's likely that at some point you'll come up against the question of whether or not to keep something for future reference. I have two ways of dealing with that. When in doubt, throw it out, or when in doubt, keep it. Take your pick. I think either approach is fine. You just need to trust your intuition and be realistic about your space. Your accountant can provide record retention timetables that will tell you how long you should keep what kinds of documentation. My suggestion is that you make the distinction about whether something is actionable or not. Once it's clear that no action is needed, there's room for lots of options on whether or not to store it. A second category with non-action is incubate. There will probably be things in your in-basket about which you will say to yourself, there's nothing to do on this now, but there might be later. What do you do with these kinds of things? There are two options that could work. First, you could write them on a someday maybe list, or secondly, you could put them on your calendar or in a tickler file. The point of all these incubation procedures is that they give you a way to get the items off your mind right now and let you feel confident that some reminder of the possible action will resurface at an appropriate time. And the third category with no action is, of course, reference. Many of the things you will uncover in N will need no action, but may have value as potentially useful information about projects and topics. Ideally, you have already set up a workable filing system for your reference and support information. As you come across material in your in-basket and email that you'd like to keep for archival or support purposes, file it. And if there is an action, what is it? This is the biggie. If there's something that needs to be done about the item in N, then you need to decide what exactly that next action is. Next actions, again, means the next physical, visible activity that would be required to move the situation toward closure. The next action should be easy to figure out, but there are often some quick analyses and several planning steps that haven't occurred yet in your mind, and these have to happen before you can determine precisely what has to happen to complete the item, even if it's a fairly simple one. Let's look at a sample list of the things that a person might typically have his attention on. Clean the garage. Do my taxes. Conference I'm going to. Although each of these items may seem relatively clear as a task or project, determining the next action on each one will take some thought. Clean the garage. Well, I just have to get in there and start. No, wait a minute. There's a big refrigerator in there that I need to get rid of first. I should find out if John Patrick wants it for his camp. I should call John, refrigerator in garage. What about do my taxes? Yeah, but I actually can't start on them until I have my last K-1 back. Can't do anything until then, so I'm waiting for K-1 from Acme Trust. And for the conference I'm going to, I need to find out whether Sandra's going to prepare a press kit for us. I guess I need to email Sandra press kits for the conference. And so forth. The action steps, call John, waiting for K1, email Sandra, are what need to be decided about everything that is actionable in your in-basket. Remember that these are physical, visible activities. Many people think they've determined the next action when they get it down to set meeting. But that's not the next action because it's not descriptive of physical behavior. How do you set a meeting? Well, it could be with a phone call or an email, but to whom? Decide. You have three options once you decide what the next action really is. Option 1. Do it. If the next action can be done in 2 minutes or less, do it when you first pick the item up. Even if the item is not a high priority one, do it now if you're ever going to do it at all. The rationale for the 2-minute rule is that that's more or less the point where it starts taking longer to store and track an item than to deal with it the first time it's in your hands. In other words, it's the efficiency cutoff. If the thing's not important enough to be done, throw it away. 2 minutes is in fact just a guideline. If you have a long open window of time in which to process your in-basket, you can extend the cutoff for each item to 5 or 10 minutes. If you've got to get to the bottom of all your input rapidly in order to figure out how best to use your afternoon, then you may want to shorten the time to 1 minute or even 30 seconds so you can get through everything a little faster. It's not a bad idea to time yourself for a few of these while you're becoming familiar with the process. There's nothing you really need to track about your 2-minute actions. You just do them. If, however, you take an action and don't finish the project with that one action, you'll need to clarify what's next on it and manage that according to the same criteria. For instance, if you act to replace the cartridge in your favorite pen and discover that you're out of cartridge refills, you'll want to decide on the next action about getting them. Buy refills at the store. Adhere to the 2-minute rule and see how much you get done in the process of clearing out your end stacks. Many people are amazed by how many 2-minute actions are possible, often on some of their most critical current projects. Option 2. Delegate it. If the next action is going to take longer than 2 minutes, ask yourself, am I the best person to be doing it? If not, hand it off to the appropriate party in a systematic format. A systematic format could be any of the following. Send the appropriate party an email, write a note or an overnote on paper and route the item out to that person, leave him or her a voicemail, or talk to him or her directly, either face-to-face or by phone. If you do delegate an action to someone else, and if you care at all whether something happens as a result, you'll need to track it. As you develop your own customized system, what you hand off and then track could look like a list in a planner, a file folder holding separate papers for each item, and or a list categorized as waiting for in your software. For now, if you don't have a trusted system set up already, just put a note on a piece of paper. WF, short for waiting for, reply from Bob, and put that into a pending stack of notes in a separate pile or tray. You may be asking, what if the ball is already in someone else's court? In the example cited before about waiting for the last K1 to come in so you can do your taxes, the next action is currently on someone else's plate. In such situations, you will also want to track the action as a delegated item or as a waiting for. On the paper that says, do my taxes, write something like waiting for K1 from Acme Trust and put that into your pending stack. It's important that you record the date on everything you hand off to others. The few times you will actually want to refer to that information, for example, being able to say, but I called and ordered that on March 12th, will make it worth establishing this as a lifelong habit. Option 3. Defer it. It's likely that most of the next actions you determine for things in N will be yours to do and will take longer than 2 minutes to complete. These actions will have to be written down somewhere and then organized in the appropriate categories so you can access them when you need to. For the moment, go ahead and put Post-its on the pieces of paper in N with the action written on them, and add these to the pending stack of papers that have been processed.